Hello, everybody, and welcome to the July 31st Trips and Traps. Andy CURLIN, joined, as usual, by Richard Migliori.
And we have predominantly turf races, which is usually the way it is with trips, but we do have a very interesting dirt race that could maybe have some ramifications going forward.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. We talk about the CURLIN later. With the rain on Sunday and Monday, we only have 4 races today. It's just very hard for us to show races on Trips and Traps that are on sloppy tracks because I don't think it's reliable using that form going forward.
No, because it's hard to figure which horses were handling the surface or not, which may have led to the trips they got.
I agree, and it's just not, even if they had the trip, who's to say they'll have the same kind of performance on a dry track. But we're going to just start out with a race from the first day of last week, the 23rd. This is a turf race, and this is a maiden first-time starter named One More Song for trainer Christophe Clement, who starts out by breaking slowly.
Yeah, and he broke slowest of all, and you can see Joel Rosario's doing the right thing. He's going to angle him over as much as he can. No sense at this point rushing up and getting involved and being caught too wide, although he is caught somewhat wide.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, Richard, I meant to ask you about this. Joel's probably thinking, well, if I just cut him over at the start, I may end up 5 lengths behind where he is now. So even though he loses a little ground, he gets him the 2-path, and maybe it's a little more important to at least have him part of the field as opposed to separate a few lengths behind the second-to-last horse.
Well, especially with a first-time starter, because once they get by themselves, now they're really confused. They don't have a workmate, so to speak, to keep them interested. So I think he did everything right there. What baffles me is what happens coming up.
Yeah, now you had a theory about it when we were watching it and going through it the first time a little bit earlier about perhaps being sort of forced to take off in here. Whatever the case, I thought we're going to see him come in the picture, stop it here. Joel has already asked this horse to run, and you watch him. It seems like he intentionally makes a run here.
I wonder if he thought that maybe the 10 horse was going to come out at this point, and before he allowed him to do that, let me squeeze him and move forward, and then the horse got to running, and now you're at a point in the race, you go, wow, now I'm going to be caught so wide, and I'm just trying to figure out what he was thinking, because this was an extremely premature move.
It was. The 10 of course, was another horse trained by Christophe Clement in this race. You know, the thing about it to me is, forget about premature move, what he could have done, or whether the horse could have won the race or not. To me, what the most important thing going forward is this move shows that this horse can run.
Oh, this horse has a lot of ability, and he was beaten about 3.5 lengths for everything. To make up the ground he did in the middle of the race, his first start going a mile, you have to think that with a little more prudent handling, he would have been right there at the finish.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly how I feel, Richie, and I feel this horse is the kind of horse that you want going forward. I don't care. The other thing you watch it, Joel knows he has no horse in the last 16th of a mile. He's not going to beat up on this horse, so he may have lost by a length and a half more than he could have if he had really been asserting himself.
Yeah, and really there was no point at that time. But if you go back to and look at the horse that finished third, he broke slow as well, but was very patiently handled and finished with energy.
And saved ground.
And saved ground. So, you know, it was like the tale of 2 trips. They both kind of had bad starts, but one horse kind of got aggressive, and it cost him.
I'm not even sure I wouldn't be interested in One More Song if he was in a maiden special weight going forward, depending obviously on who he's facing. I thought he ran well enough. It was a maiden 65 claimer. These horses are at most just a cut below the maiden specials.
Yeah, I wouldn't be afraid seeing him show up in a maiden special.
Yeah, I wonder if he wouldn't want to get him claimed going forward. The next race we're going to look at, another Christophe Clement horse, actually. And this horse is a horse that won. Pure Sensation won the quick call. Also, Escapist, a horse. Don't know how well he ran, but he did really have trouble starting out by breaking slowly.
Yeah, and it cost him. He's a horse that's been up on the pace his 2 starts. He is quick. He breaks slow. And you're going to see down the backstretch, he gets a bit aggressive with Chris DiCarlo and kind of gets to running off with him. And then that costs him some position as well. And it's going to come up pretty soon here.
I wonder if he was just a little uncomfortable, the horse, not Chris, not being in the front end. And it made him a little rank. Pure Sensation, and I want to talk about this with you, Richie. He rates very comfortably behind horses. A little lucky to get out and get the win eventually. He was the best horse in here. And the fact that he showed this ability to sit behind horses and rate is going to bode well for him going forward.
Well, it opens up a whole new dimension for him because he has been pretty much one-dimensional. He always breaks well. Didn't break quite as well, actually, in this day. And once he got in behind horses, he was covered up. He seemed very comfortable. He wasn't in the bridle too much. Maybe, too, it was a good spot to get covered up because you're not getting kicked back like you were on the dirt.
Well, the other thing is, Richie, this was a very fast pace. And, you know, he was not exactly sitting far back. He was right in the teeth of that pace. Talk about Taylor Rice, North South Side. This is a very good ride.
She did a really good job on ultimately finishing second on Choctaw Chuck. When Jose Lezcano was looking for room with Pure Sensation, she made sure she kept that door closed, and he had to wait and come out around her. And if Pure Sensation wasn't so good, that would have won the race.
No, I agree. I thought that was a sensational ride by her. But Pure Sensation, to me, he's a very, very talented sprinter. 5.5 to 6. Is probably what he does best. But, I mean, this is a horse that had the lead dueling with Bayern in the Woody Stevens back at Belmont, and he was fighting back for second till past the 8th pole. He's that kind of talented sprinter. If he can learn to rate like this and he's still good on the turf, as good on the turf as he is in the dirt, this is a horse that I'm not going to be shocked when he continues to move forward and he ends up in that Breeders' Cup down the hill.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And you hope, though, that they would give him one run down the hill because it's a whole different experience. And they run seriously downhill the first 100 yards. And sometimes it gets a horse a little panicked because they're almost losing their balance because they get so much momentum going downhill. But the thing about him is he's such an athlete. And you know he possesses speed. He used it more judiciously this time.
Yeah, and he exactly, and he rated comfortably. He wasn't really pulling on him, and maybe the turf is where he belongs. And you think of the timing. Christophe has no problem shipping out to California. Now, listen, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. He may not be that good, but listen, you look at those Breeders' Cup sprints. You got Bunch Fields. It's not like there are killers in there. A 2-year-old went as fast as Misdirection on the card for Wesley Ward last year. He could run in either maybe against Olders here going 5.5 in the turf, or he could look at that turf Amazon late in the meet, which is at Parks, I think in beginning of September, and they could ship him out. I believe there is a prep down the hill.
Yeah, there is, and I think it's now named the Eddie D in Eddie Del Huse's honor. I will say this, though. Horses that usually excel down the hill are horses cutting back from a mile, like a horse that shows speed going 2 turns, and then they get out-footed. Horse like this sometimes has the look of it. They've still got to show it.
Yeah, no, he doesn't. He'd also have to go 6.5 furlongs, and we are getting ahead of ourselves. But I think this horse might be that kind of talented, or maybe when they're not going 6.5 down the hill, maybe it'll work for him in further Breeders' Cups next year when they're at Keeneland the following year, right?
Yes,
that would be 5.5 furlongs. The 5th race on July 25th, we're going to actually talk about the winner, Stormy Rocket, who ran very well after breaking slowly and ending up in the back of the pack. He lost all his position at the start. You see him in those orange silks. But also want to talk about the 3rd place finisher, Upward, a horse through no fault of the rider and justifiably shouldn't have been placed second, but a horse that got pinballed around quite a bit in the stretch.
Yeah, he really does get squeezed late in the stretch. Probably was going to be 3rd anyway, but it's kind of, to me, somewhat problematic because it seems like a lot of these races have been fairly roughly run.
I agree. I mean, and part of it, I guess, Richie, and listen, you have much more perspective than I do, is how competitive things are here.
Well, it is competitive. Everything's amped here, but that's why it's important to kind of keep the guys just, toned down just a little bit as we're watching the eventual winner, Stormy Rocket, making that long, sustained, wide move, and they're not going slow, so he's making ground into a very fast pace around the turn.
Yeah, and the other thing, Richie, is the pace holds together. So it wasn't a race that fell apart, and while he relatively quickly got himself into 4th position, he still was back to last early, and he was always chasing wide. Not an easy thing to do. He was well met in this race, and he got it done despite a less than perfect trip.
Well, I think George Weaver's horses are all well meant up here. It seems like they really, really point for this meet, and the horses respond well to it.
No, I agree, and people have started to take notice. Did you see the 8 in there, Decisive Move Steadying? And that's what caught my eye watching the replay. So we went back and we took a look at the head-on. Basically, you want to see Decisive Move between horses. This is not hurting by Luis Saez, because as you point out, every time he comes out, he straightens him back out.
Yeah, and you're going to see a really good illustration of that right here. He's going to really correct his horse, and you can see that's about as strong as a guy can correct a horse in the stretch while still allowing them to run forward. And every time he lets him run, he drifts to the right, and ultimately the 3rd place finisher has to steady out of the spot.
And there's an argument to be made that he did not get his fairest chance to be second or even win the race in there. Still, I have no argument that he remained 3rd in here, but there was some bumping in the stretch, and Decisive Move was coming out on his own.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This was not Luis Saez guiding him out, which we've seen quite a bit of up here.
Yeah, and maybe Stormy Rocket was sort of well meant for this race, and next time he comes back, he won't run as well. But if he runs as well as he did in this race, he can come back and maybe even beat a slightly better field. I thought this was a much better performance than it looked, and even though we've shown 2 winners, sometimes winners run better than they look, but sometimes they run worse than they look. These horses ran better than it looks.
Yeah, absolutely. And the margin of victory in nose doesn't really tell the whole story.
I totally agree. We're going to look at one more race, and that's the CURLIN, the 9th race on July 25th. And in this race, we want to look at the winner, V.E. Day, who both Richie and I feel was actually the best horse, and the 4th place finisher, Viva Mallorca, who I bet on, who a lot of people thought was the best horse. I don't think we agree.
No, I think the winner was the best horse. V.E. Day broke slowest of all. He was very patiently handled by Jose Lezcano. He never changed leads. He broke from the gate on his right lead, switched to his left lead right in here, and never went back to his right lead the remainder of the race. That's a mile pole right there.
He got a supremely confident ride, too, by Jose Lezcano. After braking slowly, he doesn't panic. He just lets him drop back, find a rhythm. And it also helps, obviously. This was not on paper a pace you'd go, wow, they were blazing. They went 24, 47, and 4, but it was a contested pace, Richie.
Yeah, you have horses on top of each other. It keeps them keen. It keeps them their energy level up because they've got pressure next to them. That's why when you see horses rating a length in front, you always want that little bit of buffer where horses aren't eyeballing each other the whole way.
Well, it's like you say, it's not how fast they're going, but how they're going fast. I was talking with my friend Craig Mokowski, who makes the figures for Timeform US, and talking about him trying to adjust sort of pace figures between a pace that's contested and going a certain time and the same time for a horse that's going it on his own up front. They're two very different things sometimes, but you can't quantify it numerically.
No, I can just talk from personal experience what it feels like when a horse, stays in the bridle and they're kind of using their energy up instead of doing it like very fluently and smoothly. There you identified where V.E. Day was, and he's basically the hunter at that point because Viva Mallorca is going to have to steady here, and V.E. Day is going to kind of get first run on him.
Yeah, he gets the first run, but I think that Julien Leparoux probably wanted to let Spot, the 8, the gray, get in front of him. The problem was maybe V.E. Day shut the door a little bit on him and got that first run. But, geez, I got to tell you, at the end of the day, I thought Julien did an awful lot of things right. To nitpick and say, well, he could have done this exactly perfectly. I mean, how much can we reasonably expect from riders, Richie?
Well, and I agree with you. I mean, and this is nitpicking. He has his opportunity. It's not like he comes flying and gets beat a nose to V.E. Day. He keeps grinding, and V.E. Day is lugging in on the wrong lead. He did a lot of things wrong, but he was the best horse in the race.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I wanted to have sour grapes after this race. It's funny, and we'll show you the head on, and we'll talk about what we're talking about. They're lined up here, and you'll see him inside of Spot, Viva Mallorca, and, of course, Jose gets that first run on. Maybe Jose knew exactly what he was doing here.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't surprise me because both Ortiz brothers are pretty crafty, pretty slick. If anybody wants to criticize the ride, if you want to criticize that, maybe Julien should have went forward at that point. But then I'm going to ask you, what was his options after that? I really don't think this horse had a lot of excuses.
If he had gone forward, I think he gets jammed up on the inside, which I don't think was the best place to be, and he gets nothing in here. I think he did the best job he possibly could have here. I mean, there is a scenario where he wins the race. But V.E. Day still would have been the best horse when he finished second behind him. So how exactly am I supposed to be whining about betting a horse that at best was second best in here, even though there's a scenario where he could have won? I mean, I'm tough on jockeys, but that's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm actually relieved to hear you actually come to the defense of a rider.
You have to be fair.
Well, you are
that's the thing. And listen, I will criticize a rider, and I do it, but you can't just be critical without being fair in other situations, and looking at the whole picture is more important than just saying that was the instance where he blew it. Well, it's not always about one move.
Well, I agree 100%. And what you're saying is that it has to have merit. Right. This doesn't have merit. People that wanted to criticize Julien Leparoux here really weren't looking at the bigger picture.
I totally agree. We'd like to hear what you think. You may disagree with us. Some races you're interested in looking at. Trips and traps at NYRAinc.com.